I'm delighted to be back at the Suli Forum. I always find it a stimulating place to be, full of a great cross-section of people. And in the spirit of inclusiveness, we've invited half the people who are attending the Suli Forum to be on this panel. So let me begin very quickly by telling you who our panelists are. And what I want to do this time is to make this more of a discussion. There will be no speeches. And as you can see, I'm a disciplinarian. I will make it tough. I will interrupt. But I do want to make this spirited. Everybody has had a lot of conversation already, and we want not to kind of deal with platitudes. We want to get into some of the real challenges we face in trying to balance, find how to put Iraq in its place in the region. So to my left is John Wilks, the ambassador from United Kingdom. Please, please, as a courtesy, if you're going to talk, leave the room. I'm serious. Could you please shut the doors? Andrew Peake, who is Assistant Secretary of State from Washington. His specialty is Iraq and Iran. Laith Kubba, who is the Special Advisor to the Prime Minister of Iraq. Minister Falah Mustafa, who well known to all of us as Head of Foreign Relations for the Kurdish regional government. And Ambassador, and you're going to shoot me if I get this wrong, Hakan Tekin. Yay! I can mispronounce my own name, who is head of the Iraq section at the Turkish Foreign Ministry. And with women making the bookends of this panel, we have Ebtisam El-Ketbi, who heads a very prominent think tank in the United Arab Emirates, the Emirates Policy Center. So our challenge this afternoon is to deal with the subject of how do we balance priorities. Barham Saleh this morning talked very movingly about how Iraq could be the bridge between Iran and the Arab Gulf and the Mediterranean. But as we all know, Iraq isn't. It is a melting pot of populations, ethnicities, and sectarian groups, but it is also trapped kind of geographically in a part of the world with a lot of different interests. So I'm going to begin with Ambassador Wilks, and we were kind of cheating beforehand and talking about the balance issue and what the prospects are. How can you help specifically Iraq get that place it deserves in the region, particularly when you have so many divisive interests around Iraq that have very different visions of Iraq itself? And please be quiet. Please shut the doors in the back as a courtesy to our speakers.
Thank you, Robin. Does this microphone work for people here?
Yeah. Okay. Just speak from the chest.
Great. Yes, I think that's working. Thanks, Robin. We're going to get this into a discussion, so I'm going to be very clear about the sort of ideas that I think will help Iraq make the most of the situation it's in at the moment, because basically there's been a really important positive story in the last year. After the elections of the President of the Republic and the Prime Minister and the Speaker of the Parliament and the appointment of the Foreign Minister, Iraq has really, I think, returned back to the international scene. There's been lots of diplomacy in terms of visits outwards and visits inwards. And I know with the interactions we've had with ministers in the UK, visits inward into Baghdad, but talking to other ambassadors from other countries, really the impact has been huge. And I think all Iraqis ought to feel extremely proud and very positive that they have, I think for the first time in the last 15 years, a president, a prime minister, a speaker of the parliament, and a foreign minister who work together and present an Iraqi view of Iraqi interests of the region and of the world. And that's a really positive thing. But to go to the next stage, to really get benefit from that and to answer your question, I think Iraq has to be extremely careful. In the title of the seminar this session is the word balance. And when you hear the President and the Prime Minister speak, as you heard the President speak earlier, they talk about putting the Iraqi interests first, but that will mean a balanced foreign policy. And that balanced foreign policy, as they explain it, is a balance between the powerful neighbors, Iran and Turkey and Saudi Arabia, but also a balance between the big countries in the world, between the United States, between China, Russia, Japan, UK, European countries. And to achieve that balance, I think, is possible, but it's incredibly difficult. It sounds like an easy thing to say. I think the Prime Minister and the President, Foreign Minister and the Speaker have all got credibility in trying to achieve that balance. But here's the catch. There is, at the moment, I think, for Iraq, a real challenge in achieving that balance between the United States of America and Iran. And I'll just give a British perspective on this. I know Andrew will want to speak. It's a pity we haven't got an Iranian representative here, because I think this is the one that Iraq has to get right. Otherwise, all this positive development of all the diplomatic engagement of the last 6 months could be lost. And Iraq will miss a real opportunity, because the world's looking at Iraq again after the victory over Daesh, and with now the reconstruction phase beginning. Virtually every country, virtually every ambassador who's in this room, who I see regularly in Baghdad or in international fora, they want to develop their country's relationship with Iraq, whether that's on the security side, the economic side, or the cultural, the educational side. That's a huge opportunity for Iraq, which Iraq did have in the past and lost, and it's got it back again. And I think it could make a real big difference to the country to take that opportunity. So it really needs to get through this very difficult period of avoiding or losing that balance between Iran and the US. And I'm going to be very frank and blunt here. Iraqis are very good at doing this, very diplomatic about it, being very clear about what we're talking about here. I'm not going to talk in generalities. So the problem we have at the moment, of course, is that the US has imposed sanctions on Iran, and there is an atmosphere, let's face it, of confrontation. The UK position is different. We have remained with the nuclear deal. We see Iran not just as a cause, but as a nation that has a position in this region which you feel very strongly when you're in a neighboring country. And I should just say I was ambassador in Oman, and Oman, I think, has done a very good job at developing a balanced foreign policy where it has great relations with Iran and with the UK and with the US, as well as with Arab countries. So it can be done. But I think we can learn a lesson from how Oman did this on how Iraq can do it. And I think the Prime Minister, the President, and the others have succeeded so far, but it's incredibly difficult. And that's why I want to talk in specifics about how to make sure they get through this difficult period. Iran, of course, sees itself now in a very threatening regional and global environment and is using, as any country would, all the tools in its toolbox to defend its national security. So Iraq is put in a position where it has to have a good relationship with Iran, which means not threatening Iran's national security, and a good relationship with the US, which means not being Iran's method for intervening in the region, either in Iraq or beyond into Syria and to Lebanon, and to an extent to Yemen. So the question is, how does the Prime Minister or the President or the Speaker of the Parliament or the Foreign Minister, how do they achieve this? And I think there is only one way to achieve it, and that's to be very clear up front with all countries, all of us, not just the US and Iran, about what the Iraqi national interest is, and to actually lay down the parameters, the criteria for achieving a partnership with all of the countries such that it serves the Iraqi interest. We then all negotiate it so that it serves our interest. And I think there are two things which Iraq at the moment is trying to achieve. And if it does achieve this in the next couple of months, I think it will succeed. And then it can harvest the gains of this new atmosphere in its foreign relations. One, I think, is to make sure that there is credibility with the Iranians that Iraq will not threaten Iranian national security. I think the Prime Minister, the President, and others have established actually a considerable amount of credibility, but also from the US perspective, and the UK shares this concern, that Iraq does not become a place where Iran and Iranian-backed groups take heavy weaponry which they wish to use in operations either in Iraq or further afield. I think if Iraq can avoid both of those things, it can sustain a balance, avoid a crisis with the US, avoid a crisis with the international community and with Iran, and harvest the tremendous gains from all the big countries in the world, all its big economic partners and political partners who want to develop their relations with Iraq.
As I was saying, Andrew Peek is now on the hot seat. The United States has called for all Iranian troops to leave Syria and has talked about putting some of the U.S. troops in Iraq as a place to monitor Iran. Everyone wants to see Iraq as a place that is a balance among the regions. But how can that happen as long as the United States looks at Iraq as a place to contain Iran or to confront Iran, to monitor Iran? To what degree does that kind of hinder the long-term goal of stabilizing Iraq and making it the player in the region that it has the potential to be?
Well, I will say
with the mic.
With the mic. Well, I'd counted on my chest mic picking this up, so I'll say at the outside, you've picked a particularly inopportune time to be tough and a disciplinarian, since I'm running on about an hour of jet-lagged sleep, and so I may well speak out of turn, which I suspect is fortuitous for the audience. I would say, I would contest your premise up front, which is that we look at Iraq in terms of the relationship with Iraq qua Iraq. That is, I think, what the vast majority of Iraqis want. That's what we in the U.S. government want. To my Washington audiences, I like to say that I enjoy talking about Iraq policy because virtually alone in the Middle East, it is the bipartisan American foreign policy concern. Everybody wants Iraq to succeed. I will say that in this vein, I was tremendously encouraged, as John noted, by what we've seen over the past 12 months. We've talked about the defeat of Daesh, but to have national elections, like President Salah noted, where Iraqis are voting across sectarian lines, where there is a peaceful transfer of power, begins to encapsulate this idea of Iraq as a model. This is not usual for the region. And the fact that people were voting, most of them, in my view, from what I talk about, on everyday concerns of democracies, services, the economy. These are tremendously powerful things, tremendous signs of normalcy. I think that there is tremendous goodwill on the United States' part and the international community to meet some of these demands of normalcy. I was at the Kuwait conference, along with many of you, a year ago, where nearly $30 billion was pledged to help support Iraq after Daesh. I was here in December with our venerable Chamber of Commerce colleague Steve Lutz, who led a delegation of over 50 companies, US companies, one of the largest delegations ever to this region, to invest, to lead American investment in Iraq. This is what we can offer. This is what the international community can offer. But it will not be there forever. It is dependent on the choices of the Iraqi government, in part. Choices on making it easier to do business. This is to realize this thing that the international community has. Ease of visas, ease of starting a business. These are the things that Iraqis want, and I think this Iraqi government will be judged on its ability to deliver. And yes, as Assistant Secretary Natali said, and I have to beg your pardon, I'm only a Deputy Assistant Secretary, which in bureaucraties is actually a step down than Denise. But as Assistant Secretary Natali said, some of these choices also involve security. We cannot expect IDPs to go back to places where there are criminal actors running around, where there are violent actors not under the control of the state. These are also choices to make over the long run, in addition to the economic choices. But I think this is possible, and I think this is indeed what we look at when we see Iraq, a chance for success more now than ever before.
Can I just follow up quickly? Is the United States willing to accept the geographic realities of Iraq's place in the region? As any Iraqi will tell you, look, Iran's next door, you're a long way away. The United States has often looked at Iraq kind of through its prism, and is it, I guess the question is, can you have any empathy for the Iraq position that they have to deal with their neighbor and have to have good relations? And after all, the Iranians did come to the Iraq's aid after ISIS intervened faster than anybody else. Isn't there an argument to be made for the United States even recognizing that reality?
I suspect that the geographic reality of the region will make itself known whether the United States accepts it or not. I think we have always acknowledged that as neighbors, Iraq and Iran will have a relationship. Indeed, it would be artificial and absurd to insist they don't. But what we want is a normal relationship, not where Iraq is a playground for outside powers, nor do we want an Iraq that is some kind of contest ground, as previous speakers have noted, between us and anyone else. That is not what we want. We want Iraq as a normal country, and I think we are closer now than ever before to getting there.
Thanks. Laith, you know all sides on this issue. What do you think it will take by all of Iraq's neighbors or by the international community to allow or to help facilitate Iraq becoming the kind of bridge that Barham talked about today? I mean, it's a wonderful dream, but knowing the history of the region, the history of Iraq, and the influence that various players have because of their connections to other countries. What would you ask of all the countries to make that happen?
Okay. Thank you. Let me first start by stating, as an advisor to the Prime Minister, my views are mine, and that's the privilege I think that I have. I can always speak my mind.
You're a very wise advisor.
Now, let me start just by a small footnote to say that we're dealing with complex issues, and we just mustn't oversimplify them. Iraq did wage a war against Iran for 8 years, and the US supported Iraq in its war. And Iran and Iraq have a very complex relationship of over 1,000 years at least. Baghdad actually ruled all that area, Persia, for about 500 years. So there is quite a complex relationship. But the key point that you're asking about, if we want to simplify it, I would say strengthen the state of Iraq. The real challenge we have today is to have a state or a shadowy, weak, diluted state. All the problems we're having flowing to us because the state institutions are weak. I think Iraqis exhausted themselves through a cycle of political immaturity, violence, call it what you like, but they did walk out of it with lots of bruises. But the statements of President Barham Saleh, former Prime Minister Alawi, and the statement of Ammar al-Hakim, all of them clearly indicate a statement of Iraqi nationalism, a strong statement of Iraqi nationalism. Now, the nationalism I talk about are not just empty nationalism. I think it's a realization that Iraq has the capacity to contribute to the region independently as a country. It has strong cultural, economic, and security ties to the region. It wants to become an active actor in the region. Currently, it cannot do it because its capacity is really cut. And as I said, it has lots of bruises. But Iraq is evolving. The reality is Iraq is evolving. We have a weak parliament. There were lots of issues to do with how the election process took place. We get a lot of immature politicians, but the bigger picture, the political process in Iraq is consolidating. People are not resorting to violence. We actually do have politics. We have a prime minister, I think, who is a shrewd politician because he has to balance so many factors. He has kept peace because there was a moment by which there was a challenge. Maybe different militias could have gone to the street. He kept the momentum of keeping countries coming to Iraq and asserting Iraq's welcoming all these countries. So all these things, I think, are on the positive note. But also one sign of evolving Iraq, I think Iraq has started to see that their differences can be a point of strength, not weakness. I think what has echoed in the statements, as I said, of the former Iraqi leaders, all of them emphasizing these different communities can be bridges to our neighbors and for us to play more of an active role. Yes, we are still evolving, and I think the destiny of Iraq will be for it to come back as an active, independent, with one last note. I think we mustn't lightly pass what happened with Daesh in Iraq at all, because this issue over the last 2 decades have been worrying the whole world, the issue of extremism amongst Muslim communities. If there is a cure to it, I would argue it will come from Iraq. It has Sunni, Shia, Sufi leadership. For over 500 years, it hosted the last Khilafah Rashida in Kufa and Baghdad. Iraq has the cultural credibility to play a role, and I think the whole world needs that role. So the big message, strengthen the state of Iraq, and we need to look at what's evolving from within Iraq. And I think there are maturing politicians who are willing to push that agenda.
I will come back to you in a minute because you really didn't answer my question of what you want, what other countries should be doing to help facilitate that. And also the question that you bring up, and that is if it takes a strong government, how long is it going to take for Iraq to get to a position that it can exert itself in a way that it says to others trying to interfere, we're the boss here. Yeah, can I ask the people who are at the door to make sure it's closed, because it's hard sometimes even up here to hear each other. Thanks. Minister.
Yes.
Kurdistan is one of the few places where you've seen both the United States and the Iranians deployed and doing things together. I'm interested in what lessons there are from that. And then the bigger question, because the ambassador sitting next to you is from Turkey, and you have your own flashpoints on that front. And how do you get beyond the kind of tensions with one of your most important neighbors? How do you bridge that so that Iraq is a player that is at peace with all its neighbors in a way that other nations don't feel threatened?
Well, thank you for the question. Of course, it will be a Kurdish or KRG perspective that I would like to share the positive vision that was shared on the panel, but I'm cautious. And that caution comes because what we have achieved so far is fragile. We have to be very careful about consolidating the achievement so that we will not lose what we have achieved so far. The challenges are still there. Yes, it's true that there is a positive atmosphere between Erbil and Baghdad. There is room for addressing the challenges and finding solutions based on the Constitution. Yet, the Constitution does not meet all the challenges and offer solutions. We have to find some solutions outside the Constitution.
But I'm not talking about the internal dynamics. No. I'm talking about Turkey and
definitely
Iraq.
Kurdistan region has been very clear in its vision and also in its approach towards the regional powers and beyond, towards the United States and also both our neighbors, Turkey and Iran. We have always wanted a balanced relationship based on mutual respect, understanding, and mutual benefit. And we have always wanted to keep that balance in our relations, whether that has been on the security level, political level, and also economic level. But this is what we have wanted for Iraq as well, because we wanted Iraqi decisions to be made in Baghdad in the interest of Iraq and for all Iraqis, and this has been missing in the last. We are optimistic about the new cabinet with all the challenges that we all face in order to put Iraq first and also for us in Kurdistan region as well.
I know, but our mission here is to talk about regional issues and not get bogged down into domestic politics. And I want to push you a little bit. You talked about the idea of mutual respect. I mean, I've been covering this region since the 1973 war, and mutual respect and dignity and so forth are these terms that everybody invokes all the time on any issue and have become kind of meaningless. So when you talk about mutual respect, don't give me wonk talk.
No.
Give me,
you know, when Erbil and Baghdad.
What does it really mean in tangible, specific terms? And if you don't answer my question, I'll just ask you again.
Okay. When Erbil and Baghdad are in good terms, we can defend the country, including Kurdistan region, in a better way, because our statement will be much stronger towards our neighbors and also the international community. Therefore, we have to be on the same page in order to keep the interests of Kurdistan region and Iraq as a whole.
Same page.
We believe,
mutual respect.
We believe that when we are able to consolidate our democratic institutions, to consolidate and make sure that there is a good judiciary system in the country, and there is a democratic system, a political culture, then we will be strong. I don't mean strong in military terms. I mean strong in political terms, in democratic terms, in economic terms, so that we can rely on ourselves first and then ask for help from the outside.
I understand that, and that point has been made eloquently by both you and Laith, and it's an important one. But I really want to ask you, all right, what do you want from Turkey?
Turkey is an important neighbor, an important partner. It has proven to be a partner for the region, but our relations with Turkey should not be at the expense of Baghdad, or our relations with Iran not to be at the expense of Baghdad, or otherwise. That's why we want to have good relations between both Erbil and Baghdad and Turkey, Erbil and Baghdad and Iran, and also our partners in the international community.
Okay, so what do good relations mean? I want you to give me specifics.
How specific do you want me to be?
Okay, there are issues of tension. Maybe I should ask them. I'll give the Turks a chance to
some of the tension may be because of reasons that are not of our creation. Part of the problem, if we talk about the presence of PKK on Iraqi Kurdistan region's territory, then it's not a problem of our creation, but we are paying a price of that. Therefore, Erbil, Baghdad, Turkey, and the United States, we need to address it in such a way that will not be at the expense of the Kurdistan region. But so far, we have paid the price.
You're a good sport.
Thank you.
So, Ambassador, let me flip it and ask, what is it that Turkey can do to help Iraq? What do you think you need Iraq to do to kind of ease some of the points of dispute? And what to you are the problems in making or encouraging, nurturing Iraq to become that kind of bridge or balance in the region?
Yeah, well, let me also first start with a little correction. I'm not the head of section, but the Director General of South Asia and the Foreign Ministry, including Iran and Iraq, among some other countries.
They gave me many titles for you, so.
Anyway, no, with Iraq, of course, it's a very important neighbor for us. And if you look at the track record of our relationship, I think we have contributed a lot to Iraq in many ways. Especially in the economic field. When you look at our trade relations, when you look at our energy relationship, we have provided a lot. And this is a mutually beneficial relationship. This is not a one-way relationship, of course. But, of course, we also are aware of the difficulties Iraq is facing. And it has been going on for a while, almost 4 decades, I should say. And for us, of course, an important neighboring country like Iraq, if it's going through some instability, some domestic conflict, or even war, it directly affects us. And we had that in the recent past. So that's why it's important for us to have a stable environment in Iraq. We want Iraq to be a source of stability rather than source of instability, a source of prosperity rather than a country which is trying to attract, some external funds. So, and this can happen. And our vision for Iraq is that. And we want to stay, of course, Iraq as a whole. And for that, the fundamental thing is, of course, the need to further strengthen the Iraqi national institutions and also to strengthen the ownership of the country among the Iraqi citizens, which has been not the case, unfortunately, in the recent years or decades. So that is a fundamental thing. We don't want Iraq to be a country where ethnic strifes are going on or sectarian conflict is going on. which is further poisoning the atmosphere in the region. And Iraq is also, we see Iraq as a microcosm of the Middle East with its diverse ethnic structure. So if there's a successful model for Iraq, I think it would have positive influences outside Iraq too. So in that respect also, it is important what we can do. Yes, we have some problems with Iraq, like every other country normally has, and we are trying to solve. I think especially in the recent period, there's a better understanding between us, both with the central government and also with the KRG, and we want to build on that. We want to keep the momentum.
Better understanding on what, though? All of you have incredible credentials and can talk eloquently on the bigger picture. But I really want to get down to the core issues. So what better understanding on
Well, for instance, let me say the security issue. That is a very fundamental priority for us. Terrorism, fighting terrorism. We have been suffering from PKK terrorism for the last 4 decades. And you know where their headquarters are.
And this is an interesting thing. The whole issue of defining terrorism is a core difference, as you point out, between the two countries. And I'll give Mustafa a chance to address that too. But how do you bridge the difference when the two countries define terrorism different terms and look at people in Iraq from very different perspectives? I mean, how do you get beyond that? It seems to me that that's a kind of microcosm of a lot of different issues in Iraq.
I don't think we have that much of differences in terms of concept of terrorism with Iraq, or with KRG for that matter.
Or who is a terrorist.
Yeah. And they have also suffered from that. So I think that is why it is a better understanding. When we are fighting terrorism, we have to be consistent. We shouldn't pick and choose with these.
Okay, so when you say better understanding, what are you talking about? What kind of agreements? What is there a better understanding about?
Well, this is an ongoing process. I'm not saying that we have resolved everything, but I think we have started a good path, and we want to build on that.
Everything's ongoing.
Yeah.
Just a little bit more specific?
I think I've been specific enough.
Sure, but I also want to give Ebtisam a chance, but go ahead, Andrew.
Sure, well, I wanted to bail out my friend Falah Mustafa and the Turkish ambassador about an example of what mutual respect and normalcy looks like. I travel to Iraq about once a month for a few days. When I arrive at Baghdad International, they stamp my passport, I go through customs, and then I get into the car and come to the embassy. There is a particularly well-known general officer from one of the neighboring countries of Iraq who does not do these things.
His name is not Qasem Soleimani.
Who has so intimidated the government, local Iraqis, that people do not ask for any identity papers at all. That is not a normal relationship. That is an example of a problem and not mutual respect.
Okay, so last but not least, Ebtisam. I'm interested in looking at the view from the Gulf. For a very long time, the Gulf states were happy to kind of say they were recognizing the government in Baghdad, but they didn't do very much in terms of providing aid. They didn't have a diplomatic presence and so forth. The Gulf is so critical to Iraq, flow of oil and so forth. How, when you look at the issue of finding balance, what is it that the Gulf states, A, want to see in Iraq, and B, can do to help it become the bridge that so many people would like to see it become?
Thank you. Let me say these poor men are stuck between two powerful women. Well, no. To tell you the truth, the Gulf has been prevented by US not to come near to Iraq after the invasion. Saudi Arabia tried, UAE tried, but we were not allowed to come to Iraq.
We're not allowed to.
What I will talk about mostly about UAE vision towards Iraq, and UAE believe in the nation state. Okay. So would like to see Iraq stable. Now I'm not talking about the regime. I'm talking about the state building. Here, the institution. Even also we have to talk about civil society, because I haven't heard this word during this discussion since the morning. How to build the civil society. You build the nation without civil society cannot be. Also, we don't want Iraq to be a followers, neither to us, nor to Iran, nor to Turkey. Okay? This is different how we view Iraq. I do understand, with all respect, what President Barham Saleh, and I do agree with all what he said. But only one thing, what he said about a relation based on economy between Turkey, Iran, and the Gulf. The problem, it's not with us. The problem is with Iran. Iran looking to others, followers and masters. They don't want a normal relation. Normal, we do hear a very nice words from them. But on the reality, you see the intervention, creating militias, doing whatever will distract any nation in the Arab world. This cannot lead to a normal relation with the neighborhood. In fact, I don't think Iran is looking for a strong Iraq. Iran is fear from a strong Iraq. Always wanted weak Iraq, so can manipulate with any sect of the. Here I'm not talking about Shia, even Sunni, Iran can manipulate with them. Okay? So how can we reach that normal relation? Now, if you're talking about Gulf, I think we are starting now to do some kind of project reconstructing Iraq, and the Saudi learned that they don't intervene in the business of Sunni Shia. And I think they want that normal relation. I think last week, they invited Falah Fayyad to Riyadh. So it's not good for them also to have a weak Iraq, but not a too much strong Iraq like under strong regime like Saddam Hussein.
So can Iraq ever be that bridge, can ever have a major role in kind of helping facilitate dialogue or heal divisions, as long as there is this incredible tension between the Gulf states and Iran? It seems like Iraq is the spillover. And put another way, picking up on what Andrew said, can there ever be trust as long as Qasem Soleimani is allowed access as he pleases to Baghdad airport?
If Iran just pull its hand from Iraq, Iraqi they have dialogue between themselves. Still, Iran or Turkey still playing in Iraq, the Iraqi will not find peace between themselves. So let us, the Iraqi, heal their society first. Then they can help the others. How can you want them? I mean, you cannot give a model if you have kind of illness inside. So if there is still Qasem Soleimani going and coming, or others, or somebody is taking from Furat or Dijla, or even playing in Kurdistan, how do you want Iraq to come back to a normal case and help others, Robin. Cannot be. Let us be realistic.
Laith, I saw you put your hand up. I also am hoping that you answer my question. So answer if you want to reply.
Or spelling things and naming them as they are. Is what you referenced the cause or the symptom of the problem in Iraq? Is it a symptom of really what is the problem in Iraq, or is it the cause of it? I think it's a symptom. It's the weakness of the state of Iraq. And if we really want to reflect on what went wrong in the last 10, 15 years, we can reflect a lot on what went wrong. Iraq has been weakened on a various, be it dismantling the army, be it pushing a constitution so quickly that has weakened the central state, be it a number of issues. And I think Iraq is in a region, we have tough countries around us. We have Turkey, we have Iran, the Gulf is rising.
No offense.
and I think the natural law of things, if you're weak, then of course everybody will take advantage of you. It's just the way things are. I think the strategy is there will not be security or stability in the region, as it was referenced by other Iraqi leaders who said it, unless Iraq restores back its strength and as a state. And I think that is feasible. It's not a wishful dream or a wishful thinking. I think it is feasible, and Iraq is more or less on a track of doing it. Iraq wants help from its neighbors, from Europe, from America, from everybody to rebuild its state. That's the key word. Well, I think help to strengthen its army is critical. Help to strengthen its economy, it's critical. Private sector, help in fighting corruption within Iraq, because corruption is no longer a local issue. There is a lot of money laundering taking place outside Iraq. I think all these areas, Iraq would welcome help, and Iraq needs help. There are large expat Iraqis, communities in Europe and America. They can play a critical role in rebuilding Iraq. All these venues can be activated. And of course, Iraq is not there to serve agendas of any country. Of course, Iraq is sensitive to what other countries think, but Iraq has its own problems and challenges, and it needs to deal with it now, not put it secondary. Iraq priorities are very clear. They need to rebuild the state. We need to keep peace. We don't want violence in the streets. We need to keep peace. We need to consolidate the democracy that we had. And of course, then we need to regain Iraq's strength as a state. And as you know, today we do have a government, we do have a state, but we have circles of powerful influence, deep government. I don't think it's deep government. It's deep power that influences decision within Iraq. We all know it. But the answer to it is there are processes that can take place, and other countries can help us make it happen.
Can I ask, I'll give you the next chance to speak, but also I want to put a question in first. In talking about cause and effect and the chicken and the egg and so forth, we tend to look at this problem of the regional players, the tensions, whether it's what a role Iran's playing, what the U.S. wants, how Turkey defines certain groups in operating in Iraqi territory and so forth. But there is this problem of the melting pot that seems to have kind of melted, and that you don't have the unity that, whether it was brought on by what events of 2003 or the aftermath, Daesh, whatever, but that there are some, the big question becomes, can you strengthen the state, and can you help Iraq become that bridge as long as there are internal differences? And you represent a community that at one point voted to chart its own future. So maybe you can reflect on how these internal tensions relate to the question of the strength of the Iraqi state and solving the problems of Iraq filling its potential.
I'll start by stating that unity cannot be imposed. Unity has to come from within. And you have to prepare the ground for building trust, building communities, and also making us feel that we are equal partners. The whole issue of the referendum was based that we did not feel that we have a future in the country, that we were treated as equal partners. There was no meaning of genuine partnership in the country. And in fact, I was inspired by the statements of President of the Institute of Governance in Canada that talked about federalism. In Iraq, we don't believe that we have fiscal federalism. Therefore, we have to find a solution. Going back to causes and symptoms, in fact, we have not addressed the root causes of the problem so far, including the fight against ISIS. Yes, we have defeated ISIS militarily in terms of a caliphate, but now it has changed to a different phase, fighting them as an insurgency. So dealing with these problems, we have to address the root causes that led to their emergence in order to ensure that they will not come up. So the issue of Kurds going their own way, if we do not address the causes, then we have to come up again to the same cycle. We have to address the issues of the implementation of the constitution, partnership in the country, and Iraq has got a lot of problems. Iraq-wide problems and problems between Erbil and Baghdad. We need to prioritize them. When we have an Iraq that's healthy, strong, and united in its democratic institutions, we will not allow other countries to come and meddle in the internal affairs of the country. But when Iraq is fragile, weak militarily, weak economically, weak in its political system, definitely more countries will come to interfere. It's important that we address the issues, we sit down together, put all the issues on the table, give it enough time ourselves without asking help. When we need technical assistance, we can ask our partners. But first and foremost, Iraqis to get together, identify their problems, put them on the table. Now we have one whole year between KRG and the federal government in Baghdad to address the issue of revenue sharing, the budget, and oil. Let's have all this year of 2019 to prepare a proper budget for 2020 so that every year we'll not do the same cycle. Second, on the security cooperation, on these areas which are very important in order to build stability, build trust, help the IDPs to return back. Otherwise, what does it mean when the fight against ISIS is over and we have the IDPs still in the camps or out of camps?
So, John,
there are many others, but
I want to ask you,
minutes.
Bringing up this issue of the of extremism, terrorism, ISIS. I mean, to what degree have we gotten into a cycle that the world is interested in Iraq, or the region is interested in Iraq, simply for what it's against, whether it's Saddam Hussein back then, or ISIS, Al-Qaeda of Iraq, or what others are doing. To what degree is there a problem of integrity of interests by the international community and by the regional governments?
Can I take one of that? Thank you. Thank you. I think when many countries, and the UK certainly is one of them, look at Iraq, and we think of it in national interest terms. So if a government is developing a policy, yes, clearly counterterrorism, making sure that Daesh doesn't come back, or a successor organization, prevention is better than cure. We want to stabilize the country for that reason. I think for countries of the region and European countries, migration is an issue. We don't want young Iraqis leaving the country. We want them finding jobs and opportunity here. We would like Iraqi communities in our country to be part of that. We have a large one in the UK, and it's great that a lot of them are part of the relationship. Some are coming back. We'd like more to come back and help with the reconstruction of the country. But the third thing is, it's quite clear, and many of us at the Kuwait conference, the reconstruction needs of the country are huge. There is a recognition by the leadership in Baghdad and in the Kurdistan region that they will need private sector partnerships with a lot of countries. Turkey and Iran are very big in that area now, but other Arab countries and other countries, West and East, are going to be part of that. And so you have these three drivers of a great international interest in partnering with Iraq now, and that's the opportunity that is there. Can I just say one thing about... Okay, less than 1 minute. Balance. Now, this question in it's been part of the debate, and it's in the title. The advantage for Iraq is unnaturally weak. It is still not, as Dr. Laith said, it is still not recovered its natural position. When you're in a relatively weak position, if you can balance your neighbor relationships, you're not reliant on one against the other, and you develop these good relationships with other countries who are not your neighbors, you can get more effective independence and sovereignty sooner. And that's why I think this is the right policy choice for Iraq, and why it's in the interest of all of us to help the Iraqis deliver it.
We have like 1 minute left. I'm already getting kind of cut off signals. And that's problem of having so many wonderful speakers with making very important points. I want to give Ebtisam a chance to weigh in on anything she feels that needs still to be said, very briefly, and the same to Andrew and Ambassador Tekin, but very, very, very briefly.
Well, we're talking about balancing. I just want to say something here. United States doesn't want to counter Iran. United States want to counter Russia and China also in the Middle East. So this is the fact here. If there is, we still in that situation in the global scene, where it's not unipolar, not bipolar, not multipolar. So this is reflect on the regional system, which we have it in our world now. All this competition there, it's reflect itself here on the regional, either between Iran and Turkey in our region, either between, you have three powers, Saudi and Turkey and Iran are competing here. So the pattern, it's not cooperation pattern, it's conflict pattern. So here we have zero-sum game. It's not win-win game in the region.
Ambassador.
I disagree with the lady. We are not in competition with any other country on Iraq, and we don't see it as a zero-sum game. We expect from all our partners, our neighbors, and all other countries or circles to see when we have more relations with Iraq, it doesn't mean that it will be less for them. And we, as I said, we want to see Iraq, a strong Iraq. We have no interest in a weak Iraq. Maybe some other countries may have. We are not one of those countries. And when I say strong Iraq, we see a strong Iraq as an Iraq which embraces all its ethnic groups, all its sectarian groups, religious groups, and represents them and provides them an ownership. We see that as a strong Iraq.
Last but not least, Andrew.
I would offer, in response to my friend's comments, that the United States is deeply committed to helping Iraqis recover from Daesh and develop into a strong sovereign state. That's why last year we gave nearly $2.6 billion in bilateral assistance to Iraq, including nearly $1 billion to help rebuild the Iraqi security forces and professionalize them. But what Iraqis want and what will help Iraq over the next decade, 2 decades, is private sector investment, again, exactly as you noted. And those private sector companies, Exxon, GE, others, won't come to Iraq because we go to them and say, come to Iraq. It's a free country. They could go 100 other places. They'll come here because of decisions the government is making about how to attract investment involving their economic laws and, yes, involving their security at home.
So this is what I call the warm-up act. They're finally getting to specifics, and I would love to have another hour with all of them. But since we don't have the time, please join me in thanking them all for a very lively discussion.